Thanks, worship team. Good morning. It's good to see everybody. Those of you who braved the elements this morning, we have extra online, I noticed when I was back there. So those of you who are online, you're the smartest people in the room. You're dry and warm and all that good stuff, but welcome wherever you are. Here, online, checking this out a little bit later online. We are glad to be worshiping all together this morning. Just a couple of announcements. We had our all-church meeting last week where our team presented our strategic objectives. So thank you for those who were able to join us for that. If you weren't able to join us, we got a few printed copies in the back next to the offering box if you want to grab one of those and take a look at it. We also sent you a link in last week's newsletter, so you can click there for the digital version of that. If you don't have either one of those, feel free to see me and we'll make sure you get this. But take a look. We'll be talking about it more and more over the next few months, and as we start shaping these things out and figuring out how to move forward with each one of them. And then the other thing I want to just mention is our small groups are launching. Some of them are launching this week. Some of them are launching next week. So depending on which group. If you haven't signed up for one, please sign up ASAP just so our leaders can reach out to you this week and make sure you have all the details. I do want to just go over real quickly just what each group is, just so you will know. We've got a group that meets in the Fairfax area on Fridays. They call it Deeper Dive. Basically what they do is they just discuss the previous week's sermon a little bit deeper. So they'll have questions around what we talk about here on Sunday. The great thing about this group is you get dinner. Okay, if you come to that. So it starts, and it's dual, it's in person and online. So at 6:30, if you're in person, you show up at 6:30, fellowship, dinner, that sort of thing. And then at 7:30, as the discussion kicks off, several folks will be joining online. We actually have a number of folks who join our small groups online who aren't even in this area, who live in other parts of the country, people who have found us along the way, or people who have moved out of the area and still wanted to stay connected to us. So this is one of the groups that meets that needs. And then every Wednesday at 12:15, bring your own lunch. The ladies' Bible study, it meets on the other end of the building here on our campus. They'll be doing a study where they're actually looking at women in the Bible. So if that's something you're interested in, Jamie would love to talk to you about being a part of that group. And guys, they'll let you come, but you're just going to have to know you're joining the ladies' Bible study, if that's okay with you. But they will let men in. And then my wife and I are hosting a group this semester at our house on Fridays called Mysteries of the Messiah. And we're actually going to be using some material that was written by a Messianic rabbi. He's pretty creative, and he's going to help us connect a lot of the dots between a lot of the stuff in the Old Testament with stuff in the New Testament and how all of that works together. So we're excited about trying out this new material. And then we have an online group that meets on Sundays. Elise Bell, our children and missions pastor, leads this. Because of Bethlehem is the title of it, and it's going to walk you through just preparing your hearts for Advent as the Advent season comes up. And that's completely online, so it's a little more accessible if you can't make an in-person group. And then we are going to have a young adult group. We had a couple come up to us last week and said, hey, we'll host and we'll facilitate that group if we have young adults that are able to attend that. So we'll be getting that information out this week about all that. So look for that. So check out our small groups. You can scan the QR code right in front of you, and that'll take you to our small groups page. You can check them all out. You can sign up for them if you find one. If you need help finding one, I'd love to talk to you about our small groups and get you connected. Sound good? Awesome. Let's go to God in prayer. God, thank you for this day. In spite of the rainy, yucky weather, we thank you for the rain that we need so bad. And we just thank you that we're able to come together, whether in person here or people joining us online as well, and we can all be in one place as we focus on you this morning. God, I pray you just open our hearts and our minds as we just continue this story that we started last week, and we did continue the conversation about, what do we do about the toxic people in our lives, the difficult people in our lives. How do we interact with them when leaving the relationships aren't possible, but do it in a way that honors you as your followers? So open our hearts and minds to what we need to know. In Christ's name I pray, amen. So we are finishing up today as we're talking about toxic people and what do you do about them, right? And we're not talking about people that we just don't get along with. We kind of defined what we're talking about here a little bit last week. We said There are people where our personalities kind of clash. We just don't get along. We headbutt. That's okay. That doesn't make them toxic. We said that toxic people, that people are allowed to have a bad day, right? We all have bad days. We do things we shouldn't do. We say things we wish we hadn't have said. We all have bad days, and so that's fair, right? Doesn't make us toxic. Doesn't make them toxic. What we said was that a toxic person basically makes us feel worse about ourselves or about the situation with every interaction that we have with them. And it's important to talk about this, and it's important to think through how we're going to respond to this, because like we said last week, if we don't have a plan and if we're not somewhat proactive with these folks, what happens is when toxic people in our lives, what happens is they gain a measure of control over us and over our lives. And before we know it, if we're not careful and if we don't have a plan for responding, we end up acting just like them, or worse sometimes. And the reason for that, we said last week, is because toxic people keep us off balance, don't they? They keep us off balance, and when we're off balance, what we do is we compensate. Like if somebody comes along and they push you, right? You're going to compensate for being pushed in one direction. You're going to compensate in the other direction. And when you're around toxic people, you just always feel like your life is off balance around them, and you're always reacting, and you're always compensating. And the natural thing for us to do is to respond in like kind. And let's be honest, I mean, it's difficult not to be mean to mean people, isn't it? It's difficult to be kind to unkind people. It's difficult to be sensitive to insensitive people, right? And we said last week that in those situations, the golden rule just doesn't apply anymore. We start going by a different rule that says, do unto others, not as you would have them do unto you, but do unto others as they have already done unto you, right? Somebody told me last week on their way out, or do unto others before they have a chance to do it unto you. And we've probably all done that with the toxic people. But the problem with that right there, the problem with that is we're getting even with someone that we don't even like, right? And it makes us like someone that we actually dislike. So what do? I mean, we don't want to. We can't just ignore them. That's not an option for us. So what do? And that leads us to our story that we started to look at last week, and to Abigail, who we're going to meet in more depth this week, who shows us that there's actually another way. There's actually a better way to handle toxic people. Abigail is a part of the story of David. A lot of people have never heard of Abigail, but she's an important part of the story of David, as we're getting ready to see. And Abigail meets David at a time when David was a fugitive. He was on the run. He was running for his life from King Saul. King Saul was just a paranoid individual. He was jealous, and because of David's popularity, he was incredibly jealous of David, threatened by him, and he's trying to kill him. And so David is on the run. He's had to leave everything behind. He's left his family, his friends, his home, all of that. He's angry at King Saul, and he's angry at the circumstances, and he can't do anything about it, and he can't get even with King Saul because King Saul is protected, he's untouchable, so he's just carrying all this pent-up anger and frustration around with him. And that's where Abigail meets David. That's where their lives intersect, with David in that emotional state. So I want to quickly catch us up from where we left off last week. Here it is in 1 Samuel chapter 25. If you've got a Bible and want to flip there, 1 Samuel chapter 25. And it says this: a certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which means he was very wealthy in that culture and in that day and age, which he was shearing in Carmel, and his name was Nabal. So this was sheep shearing season. Don't try to say that too fast. And this was the time of the year where wealthy people like Nabal, they got to find out how much they actually made this year. This was their bottom line. This was kind of a annual financial report that they were about to get. So it says his name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail, and she was intelligent and a beautiful woman, but her husband was harsh and mean in his dealings. So David and his men, long story short, David and his men find out that Nabal is shearing his sheep in Carmel, that he's about to have a big payday, right? It's going to be a payout. So David sends 10 of his men to Carmel to ask Nabal if he would be willing to share some of the extra with them. And David, he explains why he's making this request to Nabal in his message. Here's the message. It says, when your shepherds were with us, when they were out in the field month after month after month, night after night, when they were with us, we did not mistreat them. And the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs went missing. In other words, we could have taken anything we wanted from these guys and made some money on this, but instead, nothing went missing. We didn't take anything, and we made sure they were protected so that no one else took anything from them either. So your profit that you're about to make is due in part to our protection, to our service that we've provided to you. So this seemed like a perfectly logical request to David and to his men. And here's Nabal's response. He says, who is this David? And everybody knew who David was. Everybody had heard the story, so they knew who David was. But he says, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. I mean, he's broken away from the king. He's an outlaw. He's a fugitive. But anyway, I didn't ask for his help. I didn't need his help, and so I don't owe him anything. So you guys, you just go back and you tell this David that I don't owe them anything. So that's exactly what they do. I mean, they go back and they reported every word. And if you were here last time, you remember David's response, and his response wasn't, okay, well, it was worth a try, right? Here's his response. David said to his men, he said, each of you strap up on your swords. So they did. And David strapped his on as well. About 400 men went up with David. They were heading to Mount Carmel to deal with Nabal. And by the way, 400 men. This was a huge overreaction. I mean, this was going to be a massacre. As David is riding towards Carmel, he does what we often do. As he's riding along, he's kind of rehearsing things in his mind. He's kind of talking to himself in his mind, and over, he begins to kind of justify to himself what he and his men are about to do. And here's what it is. He says, it's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness, so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. And may God deal with David, be it ever so severe, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him. Hey, David is going to not only kill Nabal, he's going to kill his sons, he's going to kill all of his male servants and all of their sons as well. I mean, he's essentially going to decimate Nabal's entire family. And we read this, and we think, so David, he didn't share with you, and that's what you do? And if you've read the history of David, if you've read David's history, you know that's exactly what he did. He was a violent person at times in his life. So he's riding along, he's angry, he's powering up, it's going to be evil for evil. And the text doesn't say this, but I think he's really angry with King Saul. You know, but King Saul is untouchable. So he's found someone else that he could take his anger and frustration out on, and it's Nabal. And that's where we left off last week. And so here's how it goes from there. Meanwhile, back in Carmel, here's what happens. It says, one of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at him. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day, they were a wall around us the whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do. He's talking to Abigail, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him. So we get a little bit more insight into how toxic Nabal is. So Abigail acted quickly. And what she does here, this is kind of interesting. She assembles a caravan of food donkeys. You've heard of food trucks, right? Abigail's got food donkeys, okay? And she gets all of these donkeys and ties them all together and loads them up with food. Here's what it says. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 shades of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys, food donkeys. And then she told her servants, go ahead and I'll follow you. And then she's so smart, said, but she did not tell her husband what she was doing. Meanwhile, here comes David, right? And his 400 men armed for battle, just building up a head of steam and justifying everything they're about to do. And the text tells us that as they rode into a ravine, he sees this caravan of food donkeys, and in front of those food donkeys was this beautiful woman, and it totally messed up his mood. I mean, you ever had that happen to you? I mean, you've got that speech all memorized, right? And you're going to give them what for? I mean, you've built up a head of steam, and you're going to go home, or you're going to march yourself down to their office, and you've got it all worked out, and then that person apologizes, or they're nice to you, and you're like, oh, man, I was so ramped up to give them what they deserve and all that. I was so mad. I was ready to deliver this message. So here comes David. He's all set to just go off on the ball. And here comes this beautiful woman with a food caravan, and it just ruins his mood. I mean, how can you stay mad with all that going on? And so here's what the writer tells us. When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. And this is so powerful, this speech that she gives. She begins to speak to David as if he's already the man that she hopes he will be. And she says, she fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him." You got to love that for a wife, right? "And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men that my Lord sent." In other words, I wasn't there. And if I'd been there, maybe I could have intervened and maybe none of this would have happened. And here's what she says next. It's so powerful. It says, "And now, my Lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives, and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming my Lord be like Nabal. Let this gift, all this stuff I'm giving you, which your servant has brought to you, be given to the men who follow you." I mean, Abigail is so smart. I mean, how can David justify taking by force something that was just given to him? And then it says, "Then the Lord your God," she says, "will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles. And no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live, even though someone," and she's about to start referring to King Saul, because everyone knew the story, said, "Even though someone is pursuing you and is to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God." And she's using a lot of Hebrew imagery here, but she's basically saying to David, she's saying, "David, even though someone is trying to steal your life away, your life is safe and secure in God's hands." And then the best part of her speech, the next part, she takes him back to when he was 15 years old when he faced Goliath. And here's what she says: "But the lives of your enemies he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling." David, remember God's faithfulness. Remember when you went out, not as a warrior, not as someone who was equipped for battle, but as a kid, as a shepherd boy, with just a sling, and you faced Goliath. Do you remember how God came through for you? Remember those days, David? I mean, she's saying you don't need to get even with someone that you don't even like. You don't need to become like them or worse. You don't need to return evil for evil, because David, God is with you. And then she addresses David's future, and she simply asks him the same question that I asked you last week at the end. She asked him the question without directly asking him. The question, essentially, this next part is Abigail's way of saying, "David, what do you want? What story do you want to tell when this is just nothing but a story that you tell? Years from now, when you're the king," because God's going to honor that promise, David. Years from now, when you're the king and God has come through, and this is just a story you tell, what story do you want to tell? I mean, here's her version of that. She says, "When the Lord has fulfilled for my Lord every good thing he promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel." So you're the king. "My Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or having avenged himself." In other words, David, isn't this a better story? Right? Don't you want to be able to look back at this moment in time and realize that you stepped back instead of taking matters into your own hands? that you stepped back instead of powering up. You trusted God. And thankfully, David comes to his senses and realizes he's about to act like somebody that he doesn't even like. And it says, David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Now, at some point, we all need an Abigail, don't we? At some point in our lives, we all need an Abigail in our lives. We all need somebody who has permission to say the hard things to us. We all need someone who has access and can talk us down when we need to be talked down. We all need an Abigail in our lives. And when that person shows up in our lives, we would be wise to listen to them. In fact, for some of us here, if we're just being honest with ourselves, some of our regrets in our lives is because we didn't listen to the Abigails in our lives, right? Now, I could stop right there, make my point, and we could close in prayer. But since this is a great story, and it's really a storybook story, so I just want to read you the rest of the story today. It said, here it is. When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was in high spirits. I mean, he's so happy, right? He's making all this money. He was in high spirits and very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until daybreak. And then in the morning, when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things, and his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. And 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. And we don't really know what happened to Nabal, but based on that description, it seems like he had a stroke, right? And then eventually, 10 days later, it took his life. And then here's the storybook ending. I love this. Then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife, right? You bet he did. And I mean, those of you who watch romantic movies, you saw that coming, didn't you? And here's what Abigail did. Abigail quickly got on a donkey and, attended by her 5 female servants, went with David's messenger and became his wife. And of course, they lived happily ever after. The end, right? That's not in the text. I just added that part, so don't quote me on that. But so here's what we have in the story, right? We have a story that where it really connects to our lives at some point, either now or in the future. But we have 3 characters. We have 3 different responses, but only one hero. I mean, we got David, we got Nabal, and we've got Abigail. We've got Nabal with evil for good, right? Evil for good. David's evil for evil. That's where we all kind of want to camp out most of the time. We're kind of all tempted to live there. And then we have Abigail with good for evil. And if you remember last week, we said that Nabal was pretty much maniacal, wasn't he? David was very predictable. Abigail, though, was remarkable. Remarkable. And really, these are our 3 choices right here. These are our 3 choices. If you're not a follower of Jesus, you really get to choose your own choice. It's your choice. But if we're truly followers of Jesus, then we're really only left with one option. And it's the 3rd option. And that's remarkable. And here's the reason. It's our only option. It's because of a couple of things. First, we've been on the receiving end of remarkable, haven't we? And second, we've all been called to model it. And we don't call our remarkable amazing Abigail. We call it amazing what? Yeah, we call it amazing grace, don't we? And that while we were yet sinners, Jesus died for us. And then Jesus, who died for our sins, says, now I don't want you just to believe in me. I don't want you to just believe things about me. I want you to follow me. I want you to emulate me in your life. And how are we to do that? Well, Jesus told us one of the ways that we're to do that. He said, I want you to love your enemies. I want you to love your enemies, not just tolerate them. I want you to love them. And I want you to love your enemies, and I want you to do good to those who hate you. And we think, we think we're doing good just by not reacting in kind to them, right? Just to not attack back to the people who have hurt us. And Jesus said, that's not what I'm talking about. He says, I want you to bless those who curse you. I want you to pray for those who mistreat you. Do we really do this? Do we? If we're honest, most of us would have to say, we don't even spend a lot of time praying for the people who do good to us, much less those who mistreat us and hate us and hurt us. And Jesus says, I want you to pray for those who mistreat you in your life. I want you to pray for the toxic people in your life. I want you to do something for them, and because that's how you keep from becoming like them. And when you do something for them, when you pray for them, when you bless them, you actually become more like your Father in heaven. You're actually following me, he says. So, you have toxic people in your life? You have a toxic person in your life? A family member, a neighbor, somebody you work with, somebody you know, and you just can't escape them. You just can't remove yourself from that relationship. What would it look like in your circumstance to do good to those who hate you? To return good for evil. In that situation, specifically for you, what does that look like? And here's the deal. It may not change anything in them. In fact, from my experience, it probably won't change them all that much. But it will do something for you. It'll do something in you. So when the story of the toxic people in our lives is just a story that we tell to somebody, let's be able to tell a better story. Let's be able to tell a story that's not a predictable story. Let's be able to tell a remarkable story. Let me pray for you. God, we've all got people in our lives that just make life miserable for us. They're toxic. They're just difficult. They're mean-spirited. They're aggressive or passive-aggressive. And they're people that we just can't ignore because of the circumstances. We just can't walk away. And so, God, I pray that you would put the Abigails in our lives when we need them most, where they would speak into us and talk us down. And I pray that rather than giving back evil for evil, we would figure out how to give back good. That we would actually pray for those that make our lives difficult. That we would find a way to bless them. That we would find a way not to do things back to them, but to do things for them. And not necessarily so it will change them, but so that it will change us. So that it will make us more like you. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Hey, I want to thank you for being here today. Don't forget to sign up for a small group if you haven't already. Check those out. I'll be out in the lobby. Love to talk to you about that. But I hope you have a great week. Stay dry today. And let's stand and sing one more time as we head out.